How do you become a private pilot, and what are the requirements? In this video, I'm going to walk you through the process and each of the requirements that you'll need to meet in order to become a licensed private pilot. And at the end, I'm going to share my top 3 tips for getting your license in fewer flight hours while improving the quality of your flight training. First of all, becoming a private pilot is easier than you think. The process of becoming a private pilot can be broken down into 3 parts: eligibility, ground and flight training, and testing. Now, a little disclaimer here, the requirements we'll be discussing in this video pertain only to you if you're getting your airplane single engine land private pilot certificate. And we'll be referencing the Federal Aviation Regulations Part 61, Subpart E, with only the sections that pertain to single engine land airplanes. If you're planning to fly a helicopter, balloon, or a seaplane, or any other type of aircraft that isn't a single engine airplane on land, then you need to reference the Federal Aviation Regulations Part 61, Subpart E, with the sections that pertain to the particular type of aircraft that you'll be flying. You can find the Federal Aviation Regulations, or FARs, that we'll be discussing in this video by doing a Google search for Federal Aviation Regulations Part 61, Subpart E, or by downloading the ASA FAR AIM app. Okay, so first, eligibility. You're going to need to meet certain requirements to even qualify for a private pilot license. The first one, you need to get your student pilot certificate. I'd recommend getting your student pilot certificate as soon as possible once you start working with a flight instructor, because you'll need that student pilot certificate to fly solo, which happens surprisingly quickly once you start flying regularly with an instructor. The best way to get your student pilot certificate is through your flight instructor. They'll go online and help you fill out the application, which they will sign. Then your student pilot certificate will be mailed to you within a few weeks. Second, you're going to need your medical certificate. This is another document that you're going to need to fly solo, so make sure to get it as soon as possible. In order to get your medical certificate, you're going to need to schedule an appointment with an aviation medical examiner. If you do meet the health requirements, the aviation medical examiner will issue you your medical certificate at the end of the appointment. To find an aviation medical examiner in your area, go to the FAA.gov ME locator. You can search for aviation medical examiners in your area through this site. Now, I don't suggest searching by city or zip code unless you live in a big city, because the search is just too narrow. Instead, try searching only by state, and it'll pull up all the aviation medical examiners in your state. Then you can go through the list and find the ones in cities closest to you. Typical cost for an aviation medical appointment is between $100 and $200. The next requirement is you need to be at least 17 years old in order to get your private pilot certificate. However, there is no actual requirement for when you can start flight training. It's really up to you, your parents, and a flight instructor to determine if you're old enough to begin flying. If you're able to reach the controls and you enjoy flying, you're old enough to start flight training. Then when you turn 16, you can legally solo. Once you turn 17, you'll be eligible to actually take the test and get your private pilot certificate. The last eligibility requirement set forth by the FAA is the ability to read, speak, and understand the English language. Interestingly, all throughout the world, English is the language of aviation. So no matter where you go, what country you're in, all pilots will be able to speak, understand, and read English. Now, this is an area where native English speakers have a huge advantage, and I have a ton of respect for anybody who doesn't speak English and goes through that additional endeavor of learning English so that they can become pilots. The next part of the requirements to become a private pilot is the ground training. Now, the ground training can be completed before you begin your flight training, or you can do it at the same time as your flight training. Your ground training is going to include subjects such as Federal Aviation Regulations, radio communication procedures, safe and efficient operation of aircraft, weight and balance calculations, aerodynamics and aircraft systems, weather theory and recognition of hazardous weather conditions, cross-country flight planning, and several other subjects. The full list can be found in Federal Aviation Regulations, Part 61, 105B. A few of the best ways to complete your ground training are a one-on-one with a flight instructor in person, in an in-person group setting with a flight instructor, or through an online ground school course going at your own pace. Now, my preferred method is through an online ground school course because it allows you to go back at any time, review lessons that you've covered before, and it's a significant cost savings compared to in-person ground training. To receive updates about the upcoming launch of the Private Pilot online ground school course, click the Stay Updated link in the description below. Next up, flight training. To qualify for the Private Pilot certificate, you need specific flight time amounts with and without an instructor on board the aircraft. The total flight time that you'll need is 40 flight hours, some with an instructor and some without. The time that you'll need with a flight instructor is 20 hours, or what's called dual received, because you're receiving flight instruction from an instructor. Within that 20 hours of dual received, you'll need 3 hours of cross-country training, 3 hours of night training with 100 nautical mile cross-country and 10 takeoffs and landings, 3 hours of instrument training simulating flight conditions in the clouds, 3 hours of flight training within the 2 calendar months leading up to the practical test. And during that 20 hours, you'll be working on proficiency on maneuvers and tasks such as takeoffs and landings, ground reference maneuvers, slow flight, stalls, and more. Now, typically after you've been flying with your flight instructor for a couple weeks, between 10 and 20 hours of flight time, you'll be signed off to fly solo. You'll need 10 total hours of solo flight time, which includes 5 hours of solo cross-country flying, 1 solo cross-country of at least 150 nautical miles with 3 takeoffs and landings at separate points, and 1 segment of the flight consisting of at least a straight line distance of 50 nautical miles. You'll also need in that solo flight time 3 takeoffs and landings at an airport with an operating control tower. So to recap the main hour requirements, you're gonna need 40 hours total, 20 hours with a flight instructor, and 10 hours solo. However, those are the minimums. Know that there's nothing wrong with you if it takes you longer to complete your training. The average total flight time that most people take to get their private pilot certificate is between 60 and 70 hours, almost double the minimum requirements. And most of that time is gonna be with a flight instructor. So the 3 best things that you can do to reduce the number of total flight hours that you need to get your private pilot license while improving the quality of your training are: find a great flight instructor. Don't just settle for the first one that you meet or the one that's assigned to you by a flight school. Talk to multiple flight instructors, ask questions, and figure out which one meshes with your personality and your learning style. 2, come to every flight lesson prepared. Study the topics, maneuvers, procedures that you covered in the last lesson, and then pre-read the material for the stuff that you'll cover in your next lesson. 3rd, chair fly. This literally means sitting in a chair at home or wherever you are and pretending that you're flying an airplane. It's as cheesy as it sounds and you're gonna get made fun of, but it works. Check out my previous video on chair flying to learn how to make the most of your time and your money in flight training. The last part of the requirements to become a private pilot is the testing. Now there's 2 tests that you'll need to pass in order to become a private pilot. First, the written test. This is gonna be based off the information that you learned during the ground training. At the completion of the ground training, you're gonna receive a written endorsement that authorizes you to take the written test. The written test is typically taken at a physical flight training location and consists of 60 randomly selected questions from the FAA's database. You can complete the ground training and the written test prior to beginning your flight training, or you can do them at the same time. The only requirement is that the written test has to be done before you take the practical test or check ride. The practical test is where you'll actually meet with an FAA designated pilot examiner. Designated pilot examiners, or DPEs, are not actually FAA employees. They're typically commercial pilots who conduct practical tests in their free time, for a fee, of course. Now, what I mean with this is that they're normal people and they want to see you succeed. You don't need to be scared of them. Obviously, it's normal to get nervous before any test, but know that these DPEs have your best interest in mind. They want to see you become a safe, certified pilot. So try to treat them as a normal person and not be too nervous around them. You'll spend a couple hours on the ground with the DPE and they'll ask you questions and go through hypothetical real-world scenarios to test your aviation knowledge that you've learned through your training. After that, you're gonna hop in the airplane with the DP and show them the maneuvers, procedures, and tasks that you've learned with your flight instructor and show that you know how to operate the aircraft safely. After you satisfactorily show them that you're a safe pilot and that you know what you're doing, you'll park the airplane and the DP will fill out the paperwork to turn you into a certificated private pilot. You'll get a temporary pilot certificate from the DP, which is just a piece of paper, kind of like a temporary driver's license. And then within a few weeks, you'll get your permanent pilot certificate mailed to you. Now, the cool thing here is that pilot certificates never expire, so you're now forever a part of the 0.2% of the population that are pilots. What other questions do you have about becoming a licensed pilot? Comment below so that we can get you the answers that you're looking for. If you're considering a career or hobby in aviation, subscribe to my channel to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.